I'm going to talk a little bit about architecture, actually. How many of you feel that you are technically oriented? Okay, good. And the rest of you, you need to hear some of this so that you can tell the other guys in your company who are technically oriented what they need to understand, and also for you to understand that, okay, there's some kind of strange relationship here with Agile and architecture. And I'll try to explain why we picked this particular topic. Again, this is one of those topics that actually exist in SAFe, but it's not in the foreground. But many times when we do transformations, we think about process. Oh, let's change our processes and find better ways of working. And this is good. We can find better ways of working, but we'll soon find out that, okay, when we're working in a new way, we also need to organize in a new way. So organization and processes are tightly coupled. Okay? But there's a third element as well, which is architecture. Actually, the system you're building is heavily influenced, has a heavy influence on the organization. Let's say you're assembling a car, or you're building a car. I'm sure you will have a department making gearboxes and designing gearboxes, and you will have another department taking care of the dashboard inside the car, and then yet another department making engines and stuff. It's the same thing in software. It actually has a name. It's called Conway's law, that organization and architecture are tightly coupled. Okay. Is architecture related to processes? Yes, it is. The way we work is influenced by what we build. So if we build houses, we work in one way. If we build software, we work in another way. If we determine to change our way of building software, chances are huge that we also would like to change our way of creating our system, the structure of our system. And most people working with transformation think about these two and forget about this one. So that's why I'm going to talk about architecture today. And yeah, it did work out. The old definition of architecture is the part of your system that's too difficult to change. Okay, so when someone says, we can't do that because our system is designed this particular way, so just forget it, right? This is a bad definition, so let's not use that one anymore. Here's a more useful definition of architecture. Architecture are the parts of the system that determine your system qualities. They are the parts of the system that determine what the system behaves like and what kind of qualities or properties it has. And what kind of qualities are we talking about? We're talking about qualities like availability, modifiability, performance, scalability, security, testability, usability. We like to say performance and everything else ending in -ity. Those properties or qualities of the system is actually determined by the solution we choose. If we choose a very simplistic solution, we might have really poor performance. We might have really poor scalability. But that might be enough because we're building a system for only one person. If we think about system qualities, if we specify them and say we want this much performance, we want this much, let's go back, availability, we want this much scalability, and we put a number on it, That's what we call non-functional requirements. So whenever we talk about non-functional requirements, they actually have a huge impact on what solution we can implement. So if we think about, oh, we're going to build a system that does this or that, we might have hundreds of different possible solutions to do that. If you speak to an engineer early on, or an architect early on in let's build a system kind of discussion, they will give you endless options, and they will say that one of these is particularly fun to do because I've read in the magazine that this cool technology is coming up, or a blog, obviously. But as soon as you specify the non-functional requirements, that determines what solutions that are possible to choose. For instance, if you have really high scalability requirements, today you would go for a cloud solution, where scaling is really easy, scaling in terms of capacity. Okay, and you would not choose to build it on a Raspberry Pi computer, one of these really tiny ones. So when we specify the non-functional requirements, only certain solutions are actually viable. So we need to understand that relationship. This is when product management determines that what kind of non-functional requirements we have, together with clients and together with your architects, you're actually setting the boundaries for what solutions that are actually possible. Now, it's kind of interesting in Agile as well, is that the non-functional requirements are not static. They evolve with the system, and they can even be different in different parts of the system. So for instance, if we're building something new, the very first thing we want to deliver really early on might be a proof of concept, or a spike, as Matthias called it earlier. We do that to learn something. Can we build this? Is this something that people are interested in buying? So we can live with low usability, unknown performance, and low security. That's fine for a spike. The next delivery, we might say, we want to sell this to at least one client. And what's the minimum thing that they're willing to pay money for? Sometimes called minimum viable product. We might need decent usability, some performance, and since we're delivering it to a customer, we want high security. And eventually, we're doing the big launch where we made this generally available. Now our non-functional requirements are tuned up everywhere. High usability, high performance, and high security. The interesting thing here is these releases don't require the same architecture. It's super expensive to build a proof of concept with this as the non-functional requirements. So we don't do that. The architecture can and should evolve. If it doesn't, you'll end up with what's called technical debt. And here's the new thing for architects. It's not really new. It's been around now for 20, 25 years. Agile, I mean, is that you have to do architecture differently. You have to be able to make architecture at the same time as you're building the system. One way of doing that is to say, let's go for the most flexible architecture we can ever imagine. And right now, today, that's called microservices. So since we don't know what we need and flexibility is good, let's go for microservices. I read that in a magazine on the airplane. And this is an anti-pattern. You're over-architecting. You are selecting a too complex solution. You don't need microservices for the first release. In fact, the people who came up with microservices, they now advise build a monolith as your first release, right? So how do we do it then? How should we think? Well, think about it like this. Architecture, technical solutions are there to enable business value, the stuff we actually make money on. So think about product development. that creates valuable products that people care about and want to pay money for as the train. And the rails is the technology that carries the business value. And Agile architecture is like laying the tracks as the train is moving forward. Sounds easy, doesn't it? Okay. That gives you great flexibility, because if the business decides, oh, let's go a little bit more west, you can now start laying the tracks in that direction. But if you've done all the architecture work up front, you don't have that option anymore. Okay? So in SAFe, this is called the architectural runway. It's architecture just in time, as late as possible, when you have the maximum amount of information, but never too late. And anything you do that has to do with architecture is needed immediately by the business. Okay? So it enables business value. And a backlog looks like this in SAFe. They have business features interleaved with what they call enablers. These are features or technical items that need to be built in order for some feature that follows to be possible to build. So you got dependencies in the backlog showing that, okay, we need to build this, we need to enable our business with some technology before we can start building stuff we can sell on top of it. Architecture comes in two flavors, and we still have both. We have the architecture where you do some thinking up front. This is called intentional architecture, and actually this is an example of intentional architecture. So it's kind of up front because we do it before we do that. We don't do them necessarily at exactly the same time. If we can do them at the same time, that's great. But it's possible to do it a little bit in advance. Okay? It's plan-based, although it's plan-based in an agile way, so we don't plan very far ahead. It's higher level, it's cross-team alignment. When we put something in the backlogs, we can make sure it's consistent across one agile release train or multiple agile release trains. So if you got 500 developers like SimCorp, there's some technical decisions that has to go for all developers. These are called enabler features and epics. Classic 4+1 view to describe this type of architecture. Then we have what they call in SAFe emergent architecture. This is the one that we talk about in the Agile Manifesto as well. And that's the best kind of architecture because the Agile Manifesto says so, in case you wondered. But actually, it's really good. It's faster. It's when you make architecture and technical solutions on the fly with the information you have right now in order to enable the stuff you're building in the current sprint. Okay? It's created by self-organized teams. It evolves iteratively, and refactoring is really important here. And it's guided by principles, trade-offs, and patterns. So rather than defining, having, a big brain architect at the top of the organization writing everything down for people to follow, what you agree on in the organization are principles that we like, that we prefer to follow, technical principles. Communication should always be in this way. We would prefer stateless services over stateful services, etc., etc. We have some trade-offs. We've run into some problem before, and we say, we prefer this type of solutions over that type of solution. None of them is ideal, but this is the trade-off we do. And patterns. We have, whenever we solve this type of problem, do it like this. So this is kind of codified or documented cookbook solutions to things that we prefer, so that not everybody make up their own new solution, reinventing the wheel. And these are not specific things to build. These are guidance for teams making technical solutions on the fly, and we need both. Okay? That's emergent architecture and intentional architecture. So we don't need one or the other, we need both. Now, let's look at the backlog flow in SAFe. In SAFe, we work in 3 different timelines at the same time. The strategic timeline, where things take months and years to get implemented. The tactical timeline, where things take a month or 2 to implement. And then, of course, the sprint or team or operational timeline. Here's where the actual programming is done. Now, where does the role of the architect come in? Do we even have architects? Yeah, in SAFe, we do have architects. So since Matthias explained earlier that the heart of SAFe and scaling Agile really, when you have this many developers as 500 developers, the heart is in the middle layer here, which in SAFe is called the program level or the tactical level. It ties together the vision and wishes and ideas with what stuff we're actually implementing. So it gives us an idea what we're doing in the next couple of months, right? So on this level, we do have an architect. We have an architect called system architect, and there's one architect per Agile release train. This guy works together with program management, which is a product function. And when the program management says we need to do these business features, the system architect says, well, then we need to build these enablers. So actually, we're injecting architectural stuff into the backlogs, making them first-class citizens. And you can actually explain the business value of this one. Because if we don't build this one, we cannot make money on these 2. Right? So in an Agile release train, there is a system architect whose job is not to make these decisions alone. Actually, the system architect's job is to find technical alignment across the development teams and act as a facilitator rather than a dictator, helping this group of people make wise technical decisions. And why is this? Because in a huge system, in this case we have like 6, 7 teams, this guy cannot know all the details, all the technical details about the system. So he's not equipped to make any decisions on his own, but rather facilitate this whole group to make wise decisions about the architecture. And then on this level, he represents the group of technical leaders in the teams. And basically, SAFe doesn't say in a team, who should you send there? So our advice is always to let the teams select. Send whoever you think is most appropriate from your team to represent in the architecture group or council or forum. Okay?
John?
Yes?
Just like to jump in, that's okay?
That's okay.
Do you mind jumping back 1 slide? Just to link all this together with what we were talking about earlier. So one of the things, so when I was talking about getting the backlogs ready in time, so SAFe doesn't really give a lot of guidance on that. So what we were generally seeing is that the backlogs for the planning events would be ready a few days before that, which meant that these things, rather than being enablers at the feature level, were actually becoming enablers down here. So we were having huge, or we still are, having huge technical enablers down when we're trying to sprint and get stuff done, rather than spotting them early enough. So it was just, I think it's just a good link back to, the getting the backlog, the product backlog ready for the planning event isn't just about, knowing about the business features. It also is crucial for the architects to be able to spot these other things that need to be done. And so what we're currently seeing is that the architects are probably a little bit too far down at the team level trying to help with stuff there, and we're getting huge bits of work there where actually we need to bring them up. So it kind of links together the thing earlier we were discussing about, the backlog preparation refinement is actually crucial to a number of things, not just the features but also the architecture as well.
Great. Thank you, Neil. Stay there. Don't go anywhere. I want you around. So the final bit here is maybe what the architects did a little bit too much of then, being coach, mentor, and teacher for these guys, working closely to the teams and not, thinking about technical alignment and looking forward. But you need to do all of these three items. So if we look at the responsibilities for a system architect, is to create great architecture solutions and information models in the Agile release train together with the other guys. Also, help product management to get sane non-functional requirements. And I usually take an example when it comes to measuring time, for instance. Few product managers understand from the very beginning the cost impact of specifying too hard non-functional requirements. If I want to measure time, and I say to Neil, I want to measure time down to 1 nanosecond, what kind of implementation would you choose?
Wouldn't even know where to start.
Maybe an atomic clock or something like that, right? But if I say, I just want to know if it's morning or afternoon, you might say, okay, that's, if it's is it sunny outside when we measure time? And I say, yes, it's always sunny. Well, a stick in the ground, right? A stick in the ground will make a solar, what do you call it? Solar clock or whatever. So the shadow will, point either to afternoon or morning, right? And that costs almost nothing, whereas an atomic clock costs extremely much. So you could easily say that, oh, let's make them really tight. Yeah, now we get the best system, but you will also get the most expensive system. The system architect also look ahead and think about the lifetime cost. The solutions we choose, we're going to live with them forever, at least for the lifetime of the system, and that can be really expensive or cheap. And then create program level enablers. Create the architecture runway. So those are the responsibilities of the system architect on this middle level in SAFe. Now let's move over. As Matthias mentioned, here's where you start. Once you get this going, you start focusing even further ahead on the strategic level. And there's architecture here as well. Very similar in SAFe to what you do on the program level. So on the portfolio level, there's portfolio management and an enterprise architect, or several enterprise architects. And they have a similar role, whereas portfolio management dream up fantastic business cases and features or epics that we want to build. Someone says, we want to have a gazillion users, and we want them to be able to access our system from anywhere in the world, even on the mobile phone. Then perhaps the enterprise architect says, well, in that case, we probably need a cloud strategy, or something like that. And that will end up as an enabler epic for business cases. Okay, so here, on the system architect level, we have the enterprise architect function that works together with all the Agile release trains. and they form a group making strategic decisions. Same type of role, technical alignment, facilitator, coach, mentor, and teacher. Here is where SimCorp is taking its first baby steps, I would say.
Yep.
Do you want to tell us anything about that?
Yeah, so what one of the things we're going to try and do is to enable the architects to kind of move up to the level where they should be operating. So one of the possible ways to do that is to down at the team level to sort of have a more of a sort of tech lead role down at the team, and the idea would be that the architects would form communities with them, so they would create the alignment down to the teams, and then that would hopefully free up. The goal would be that would free up the time of the architects to kind of move up to this next level and spend their time looking at the architectural enablers, and then working much more closely with the enterprise architect as well, and that the sort of the function up there. So really there'll be the kind of the glue between the sort of long-term vision of where we want to go technically and actually getting that done down on the ground. So it's kind of letting them sort of float up a little bit and become less, not necessarily less hands-on, but less sort of day-to-day operational. So,
thank you. So the responsibilities for the enterprise architect, actually what I'm explaining now is only a fraction. If you read the list in SAFE, what the responsibility is for either of these two architects roles are, the list is huge. It's huge. So these are the main, really important ones, the ones that actually matter. So a high-level holistic vision where we're going technically with our product portfolio. Create enabler epics, work together with portfolio management and inject stuff in the portfolio backlog. Also, make sure that good ideas that are implemented in one agile release train, in one value stream, can be cross-pollinated to the other. Create that forum or that space where that kind of sharing can happen. And also bring in influences from the outside world. And non-functional requirements. If you got one value stream building a set of products and another value stream building another set of products, and you're selling those two sets of products to the same client, and they have completely different, performance characteristics, security characteristics, the client's going to say, what the are you doing? Don't you know what the left hand and the right hand are doing? You're building two completely different types of systems. So getting that alignment of non-functional requirements across the organization as well. So that was a little bit about architecture and the importance of it and how you can see that in SAFE. There's some time for questions if you have any. Yes.
Sorry, a question about the terminology. Do you say that release trains equals value streams?
That's a good question. I got the mic, I just realized. Yes, you build release trains around value streams. So a company already has value streams. It's making money and delivering stuff that people want to buy. That's evidence that you do have value streams. When you create a agile release train, you want to make sure that it is aligned with a or a set of value streams. As opposed to, for instance, trying to create agile release trains in a component architecture where one train is building the foundation and another train is building the user interface and a third train is building what's in between. That's going to be a lot of synchronization between release trains, and it's going to slow down your organization. Okay. More questions? Yes.
So I'm wondering if you have any good tips, experience, or principles upon which you can balance sort of the friction between how much energy and time you spend on enablers versus business value. There's sort of a friction that is sometimes healthy and sometimes not so much, especially if you have a big organization with a lot of legacy. Yeah.
Yes.
How can one manage that?
Yes. So it's a good question, because if you ask the engineers, we're always doing too little of enablers and technical stuff. And if you ask the business side or the commercial side, where they think we're doing too much. And that positive creative tension is why you have the architects and product people caring about the same backlog on the same level in the organization, in the delivery organization in SAFE. So you get that creative tension by making them sort of equal there. And also, when you want to do technical stuff, you always must explain what does this technical stuff enable the business. And then the business or the commercial side or the product side can say whether that's important to them or not. So everything that ends up as a tech item or enabler in the backlog is immediately needed by the following stuff in the backlog. If it's not, if you're just building, ahead, then you have a hard time explaining why should we do that now.
There is, of course, a context component to this that can enable you to either go really high with a number of enablers or really low. But a very simple rule of thumb test I do with product managers is I ask them to show what level of enablers they have over time. And if that level is below 15% over time, then that system is just going to deteriorate. So that's a very, very simple rule of thumb test to check for your product portfolio. 15. 15.
You're not allowed to mention that number again.
Actually, this is a Neil question, I think. So your architects were on the lower level right now, and you want to bring them up, right?
Yeah.
I understood you correctly.
So
I mean, on the actual release train rather than more the strategic place. Yeah. Sorry.
So-
Actually, I have a second question.
okay, I'll just clarify that one first anyway. So organisationally they're in the right place, but operationally they're too low down because we've got something missing below them.
I'll just
So
speak very loudly.
Yep.
'Cause my question
I think they want it for the.
Oh, okay. My question is really how easy, I mean, on a personal level, are they happy with that transformation? Are they looking forward to being more strategic? Or are they kind of like Jan was implying that, we like to do the techie stuff? I mean, I've worked with many, many architects, and they're all kinds, right? And you have how many?
So we've currently got 8 architects, so we've got 1 in each train. So I think we're going to have, we've got a mix. So some would rather be more sort of down towards the team hands-on, and some want to be a bit higher, a bit more strategic. I think the thing that Jan put up though is a key, is that really they're, the architects now, they're there as sort of facilitators and enablers rather than sort of decision makers and the people who say you should do this and not do this. So I think that's kind of the, that's where we need them to get to. That's the level we need them to operate at. So to answer your question, I think there's a mix, and it's I think it's the same in any change in any organisation. There's some people who benefit from it, who like it, and some who don't, and hopefully you can then help them find something else that they really want to do. So.
Can I ask a second question, or is someone else?
Please.
Sorry. I mean, just stop me. All right. You had a legacy organization, same old, for years and years. Did you have a role of a business analyst that actually did a lot of this work with non-functional and functional requirement and transitory requirements? And if so, what happened to them? If you did have BAs?
So we had business analysts before, and they were kind of a mix between subject matter experts and people that went out and gathered requirements. Okay. So the vast majority of those have transitioned to be product owners. That's what they have. Yeah. So and I think partly because of a lot of the stuff we do is financial products, so you actually need subject matter experts around anyway. So they, some of them play the dual role of subject matter expert and product owner. In terms of the non-functional requirements, they would have previously been done probably a mix between the BAs and the architects that we had before. So I think it's still, it's kind of that's now transitioned more to the responsibility of the architects overall. Cool. So. Okay, let's. I think there's one more. Okay, last question.
So does SAFe dictate cross-functional development teams, or is it okay to organize into specific, a specialized task force for front end and back end design, so on and so forth?
Yes, in general, SAFe strongly promotes cross-functional teams, very strongly. You will find all sorts of combinations out there. And usually when people have functional type of organizations, where you got front-end guys and back-end guys and stuff like that, it doesn't really work very well for them. So the trick is that when you create cross-functional teams, you still want to preserve the knowledge you have within the domain of front-end and the domain of back-end. So the safe way of doing that is, at the same time as you create cross-functional teams, also create horizontal communities of interests. We didn't mention it today, but that we did actually do that at SimCorp.
I'll just finish up. So what we've actually got right now, we've sort of come from teams that were more component-based or based on sort of layers of the architecture. So for the teams that make up the core value streams, they're now essentially cross-functional teams. So they're the ones that are sort of delivering the business value, the features to the clients. So they're all cross-functional teams. We still have, because of where we've come from, we've still got a number of teams that are very component-specific. So we've got like a database team, and we've got some teams who manage certain bits of the framework of our system. So we're kind of in transition at the moment. But over time, one of the goals is to really start to move. We've got a team that manage some of the UI framework. We really want to move them over time into the different value streams. But as Jan says, keep the community of practice around that strong. So we still want those people having that common interest, but we want them to be out there doing the work in the team. So we haven't got the handoffs and the dependencies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everyone. I think we closed the topic there, and just want to remind you that if you're thinking about getting some training in SAFe, we have 2 guest teachers coming to us in January. These guys are known for a pragmatic approach to SAFe and not religious approach, and that's why we let them come into our offices. Matthias knows more.
Yeah, so I work with one of these trainers. That's why we actually invited them to make sure that they can deliver a pragmatic view of how you actually use SAFe and then put it into practice. So this is a very rare opportunity to do that in Stockholm. So if you are interested, take the chance. Can't guarantee it will happen in near future.
Anything else?
Thank you for coming. Thank you for all the good questions.